partnerships in the 53 seconds we have remaining.
This news story was written by David J. Lynch. Trump escalates global trade war with new 25% automobile tariffs. The president's plan will probably drive car prices up. The White House says the goal is to bring car manufacturing back to the United States. President Donald Trump on Wednesday announced plans to impose a 25% tariff on imported automobiles and auto parts, gambling that consumers will accept higher prices on cars today in return for the promise of regaining lost manufacturing jobs in the future. Speaking in the Oval Office, the president said he was acting to encourage the return of auto manufacturing to the United States, predicting tremendous growth in the industry and enormous new tax revenue for the U.S. Treasury. We'll effectively be charging a 25% tariff, but if you build your car in the United States, there is no tariff, Trump told reporters. Vehicles that meet the duty-free requirements of the United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement will be taxed only on the non-U.S. portion of their components, the White House said. The government will begin collecting the new import taxes at 12:01 a.m. on April 3rd. The White House later told reporters that the tariff would be added to an existing 2.5% levy, making the total charge 27.5%, and was aimed at addressing a critical threat to national security. Trump's statement was the latest in a fusillade of trade pronouncements since his inauguration for a second term 2 months ago. Since re-entering the White House, the president has ratcheted up import taxes on foreign steel and aluminum, as well as on goods from China, Canada, and Mexico. On Tuesday, he is scheduled to announce a sweeping reciprocal tariff designed to raise U.S. import taxes to match those levied by other nations on American products, perhaps his most decisive break yet with decades of trade orthodoxy. Seeking to allay financial market concerns, the president said Wednesday that people would be very surprised at how lenient the tariffs will be. "We're trying to keep it somewhat conservative," he said. Trump's decision to raise taxes on imported vehicles represents a direct challenge to an industry that has never been more dependent upon cross-border commerce. Imports of automobiles, parts, and engines last year totaled a record $474.3 billion, according to the Census Bureau. Vehicles sold in the United States with nameplates from GM, Ford, or Stellantis emerge from supply chains that snake back and forth across U.S. borders with Mexico and Canada and draw on parts and components from Europe and Asia. But the White House said Americans' dependence upon other countries for roughly half of the 16 million vehicles purchased last year left a withered domestic industry. Trump invoked his Section 232 national security powers under a 1962 trade law to impose the tariffs. "Our auto industry was a critical pillar of America's arsenal of democracy that helped win World War II," said Peter Navarro, the White House senior counselor for trade and manufacturing. "And importantly, we were a manufacturing nation then, where we manufactured as opposed to simply assembled cars from foreign parts. And what has happened is the foreign trade cheaters have turned America into a lower-wage assembly operation for foreign parts that threatens our national security." Trump's tariff plan drew applause from Sean Fain, president of the United Auto Workers, who said it was a major step in the right direction for auto workers and blue-collar communities. But many business groups attacked the tariffs, with the National Foreign Trade Council, representing multinational corporations, saying they would do irreparable harm to the auto industry. The auto tariffs show that the president is prepared to run greater political risks than during his first-term trade offensive. With the average price of a new car nearing $50,000, Trump's tariffs could add more than $10,000 to one of the most expensive purchases many American households make, industry groups have said. Those higher costs could sting consumers still sensitive to inflation after the punishing price hikes of the post-pandemic economy. "This will be another important example of consumer-facing products getting hit," said economist Chad Bone of the Peterson Institute for International Economics. The president described Wednesday's announcement as very modest. But his insistence that automakers pull their supply lines back within the United States will mean major disruption for an industry that employs more than 3 million Americans in factories, dealerships, and warehouses across the country. On Wall Street, shares of General Motors and Stellantis fell more than 3%, while Ford was almost unchanged. Trump had given automakers a brief reprieve earlier this month, exempting most of the output of their Mexican and Canadian facilities from tariffs he imposed on other products from the U.S. neighbors, after pleas from the chief executives of the big three car companies. The president expected the companies to begin relocating their production operations during the one-month respite, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said at the time. He told them they should get on it, start investing, start moving, shift production here to the United States of America, where they will face no tariff. "That's the ultimate goal," Leavitt told reporters. "That won't be easy." For decades, presidents of both parties have encouraged manufacturers to establish supply chains based on efficiency and low cost. Changing those production networks will take years, cost billions of dollars, and may achieve the president's goals only by sacrificing other objectives. You've already got the best price, quality, and delivery. Now you're telling them to do something different, and it'll be worse, said William Reinsch, a trade specialist with the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. You may get cars that are not as good as the ones you're getting now. Job gains from reshored manufacturing may disappoint. Thanks to rapidly changing technology, auto parts factories are far more productive today than they were during the outsourcing heyday of the 1990s, meaning any new factories will need fewer workers than they did in the past, and sticker shock may be coming to local new car lots. The tariffs imposed today will make it more expensive to produce and sell cars in the United States, ultimately leading to higher prices, fewer options for consumers, and fewer manufacturing jobs in the U.S., said Jennifer Safavian, President and CEO of Autos Drive America, which represents the U.S. operations of foreign carmakers. Trump also said Wednesday that he would consider lowering the tariffs the United States charges for Chinese imports if the Chinese government agrees to help sell the video sharing platform TikTok to a U.S. owner. The auto industry has long been a preoccupation for the president. In 2018, he threatened tariffs on European cars if the European Union did not lower its barriers to imported vehicles from the United States. At the time, German officials grew frustrated trying to explain to the president that European consumers had little appetite for Detroit's big pickup trucks and sport utility vehicles, which were a poor fit for the continent's narrow streets. The EU imposes a 10% tax on American cars, while the U.S. tariff on vehicles from Europe is just 2.5%. Under pressure from Trump in recent weeks, European officials have suggested the bloc could lower its levy to match the U.S. figure. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled a proposal to strengthen Canada's auto sector with a $2 billion strategic response fund. Carney, who is leading Canada's Liberal Party in elections next month, called for developing an all-in-Canada network for auto parts manufacturing to build more car parts in Canada, limit cross-border movement of parts during production, and attract investment. Mexico is the seventh-largest producer of motor vehicles in the world, with nearly 4 million a year rolling off its assembly lines for manufacturers such as General Motors, Ford, Stellantis, and Volkswagen. Its industry is heavily export-oriented, and nearly 80% of Mexican auto exports went to the United States in 2024, according to Mexico's government statistics agency. The industry is vital to Mexico's economy. It accounts for 4.7% of gross domestic product and nearly 22% of manufacturing GDP, according to trade groups. It generates more than 2 million jobs in Mexico a year. Much of Mexico's trade deficit with the United States comes from sales of passenger vehicles and parts. Mary Beth Sheridan in Mexico City and Amanda Coletta in Toronto contributed to this report.
This news story was written by David J. Lynch and Jeff Stein. Trump barrels forward with tariffs for Dirty 15 trading partners. New taxes on imports from countries that sell more to the United States than they buy may not undo trade imbalances, analysts say. The nations that President Donald Trump is expected to target with new tariffs next week share one thing in common. They all sell more goods to the United States than they buy from it. But the similarities stop there. The nations that the president could hit with new reciprocal tariffs on April 2nd, which account for nearly 90% of the $3.3 trillion in merchandise that the United States imported last year, range from tiny Switzerland to China, the world's second-largest economy. Trump administration officials are rushing to tailor the new import taxes to each country's specific trade policies, broadly conceived to include their domestic taxes and product safety requirements, as well as tariffs. The goal, as set out in a presidential memorandum Trump signed on Inauguration Day, is to eliminate destructive trade deficits. But each country will face the same U.S. trade remedy, at least at first, higher tariffs. And some trade experts say the president's enthusiasm for tariffs and his belief that unfair foreign practices explain the $1.2 trillion U.S. trade deficit risks missing the mark. A lot of factors contribute to trade deficits. Most are macroeconomic and have little to do with tariffs, said Wendy Cutler, a former U.S. trade negotiator and now vice president of the Asia Society Policy Institute. Reciprocal tariffs could contribute to a reduction in the trade deficit, but I don't think in a major way. White House planning for next week's tariff rollout, meanwhile, comes amid further signs that the protracted trade debate is taking an economic toll. On Tuesday, the Conference Board's measure of consumer confidence fell for the fourth consecutive month, plunging to 92.9 in March from 100.1 in February, with expectations of the economy's future performance sinking to a 12-year low. Consumers are spooked by headlines about higher tariffs and trade war, Doge cuts, and the stock market sell-off, wrote Bill Adams, chief economist for Comerica Bank in Dallas, referring to Elon Musk's government efficiency effort. The president's reciprocal tariff plan, billed as raising U.S. trade barriers to match those that other nations impose on U.S. products, grew out of his campaign promise to enact a universal tariff on all imported goods. In a recent interview with Fox News, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said 15% of U.S. trading partners, which he labeled the Dirty 15, impose high tariffs on foreign goods, including those from the U.S., and erect other significant barriers to trade. These countries would be the focus of the president's scheduled April 2nd reciprocal tariffs announcement, he said. Among the trading partners being evaluated by Trump administration officials are those with the most imbalanced U.S. trade, including Brazil, Canada, China, the European Union, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, South Africa, South Korea, Switzerland, Taiwan, Thailand, Turkey, and Vietnam, according to a Federal Register notice from the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, USTR, last month. Not all bilateral trade deficits, of course, are the same. China effectively subsidizes its manufacturers at the expense of consumers, resulting in a flood of inexpensive Chinese-made goods onto global markets, which helps explain the $295 billion deficit the U.S. incurred last year. But China's 3% average tariff on a trade-weighted basis means it doesn't tax imports much more than the U.S., with its 2.2% mark, according to the World Trade Organization. Within the EU, tiny Ireland
than the behavior and reaction to what happened. I think that's the most important thing, period. Let's give Trumpy a bit of time to get back in gear, if you will, period. I think so far he did okay in terms of letting this evolve. And I hope that his team learned a lesson that if you are going to serve in these positions, you have almost, you were appointed by someone who's directly elected by the people. You have an oath yourself. You are carrying the dignity of this country's well established and well earned and generally positive and altruistic and worldly, if you will, reputation that has been a key ingredient to our country's institutional credibility and first in class reputation vis-a-vis our intelligence agencies, our foreign cooperation with the rest of the world, and our interaction with the rest of the world. And we need to keep that in mind and just do better. I think moving forward, the last thing I would say is, without throwing anyone under the bus and any sort of critics of the administration, even if the president and administration behave the way they do, they could probably be better served by tempering immediate reaction and literally just pausing for 90 seconds, communicating whether that's through back channel or whatever, in the spirit of at least both sides agreeing on getting the story